thank you very much for joining us again. And the first question that we want to ask you is, what's your comment on the importance of translation in a multilingual nation such as India?
See, this is something which is a very important area which we must address now. And I feel that, in the last few decades, the translation between Indian languages, unfortunately, is coming down. And if you look at in the last 100 years, there have been so many translations between Indian languages. In those days, it was not so much that the translations were getting done into English, but there were certainly more translations into Tamil and into Malayalam, and from Malayalam, from Bangla. Like, for example, Tagore's works are so well translated into Kannada, top-class translation, really, which was done some, maybe 50 years ago by someone who went to Calcutta and who lived there and learned Bangla, and it was really a top-class translation. So there were many such translations between languages and also between Sanskrit and Kannada. And if you look at Shakespeare's translations, there are some excellent translations which you can, trace back, 1893 onwards, or even earlier. So there is a strong tradition of translation, and there is a tradition of reading translations. And now, in the last 25, 30 years, there have been a lot of interest in translating works into English. And I think it is also because there is a kind of, I must say, the expertise that was available in Indian languages is slowly going down. For example, if it was so natural for anyone in Bangalore to know 2-3 languages, like many of our great writers had their mother tongue as Tamil, Telugu, like Masti spoke Tamil at home, Bendre Marathi, Karnad Konkani. So there were many such examples. And then these people were, in a way, they were bilingual and multilingual, in fact. So that kind of tradition is going away because you see that in the cities, now children go to English medium schools, and this is a direct consequence of that. We see less and less translators available to do even translations among Indian languages. And I think translations now, so what happens is now there is a dependence on English. And hence it has become important to translate into English, which I feel is not a great situation, because I would really prefer translations directly between Indian languages because of various reasons, because of its vocabulary, culture, the syntax, and there are 100 reasons. I won't go into that. So I would really prefer translations between Indian languages, but then unfortunately, since it is going down, at least we must focus on translations into English and then maybe into other languages. When one of my works got translated, Ghachal Guchal got translated into Odia and into Bangla, I insisted that the translator must look at the Hindi version. He could also look at English version, but then the main dependence must be on Hindi. So these were some of the efforts that we can make so that, if the person doesn't know the language, the source language, at least we depend on another Indian language. But then I see that it is not always possible, and going through English seems to be the quickest and the easiest way today. And hence it takes a lot of importance that we do these translations well. And there is a certain amount of skill that we need to develop. And I feel that we don't have those skills enough. There is a need to have these translators collective, if we can say, use that word. And then, there need to be a certain kind of training, certain kind of exchange of ideas, certain kind of vocabulary, it's very important that they converse between each other, and which was happening earlier, but now, I think it is important that the English language translators, translators into English need to work on this a little bit more.
I think some really fine points raised, including the fact that eventually what we must move towards is translations between Indian languages again. And another thing I was struck by as you were talking is precisely this, the movement from multilingualism to bilingualism, and now what Peggy Mohan is calling diglossia, which is precisely this, all these young children who go to English medium schools, and so how that interrupts with their knowledge of Indian languages.
Yeah.
So fascinating. Thank you so much. And could you also tell us a little bit about the landscape of Kannada nonfiction publishing?
Yeah, this nonfiction in Kannada has longer history than the modern fiction, one can say. Of course, the fiction in terms of the Halegannada and the prose and the inverse is all has a long history, and probably the longest, one of the longest in Indian languages, which is over 1,000 years of continuous literary tradition. But if you look at the modern Kannada, and if you look at, say, the period that we are focusing on, say, 1850 onwards, there is a good amount of nonfiction, and that was, there is plenty of it, and especially at the beginning of the 20th century. Many of our great writers of that time have been writing different forms and in different what was called a Lalita Prabandha was very popular at that time, and Lalita Prabandha is a form in which people it suggests a light reading, but it is not always the light reading. But there were writers like V. Sitaramaya, there were writers like D.V. Gundappa, there were many other stalwarts who have done nonfiction. One example that comes to my mind is there is a line from Pampa, which was interpreted, and there were 4 lines from Pampa which were interpreted differently by different people. And then recently, a few years ago, a person brought out a book compiling all these essays from 1926 till 2011. And it had 63 articles written on these 4 lines. The lines were suggesting that there was there was a bet between Karna and Bhanumati, who is Duryodhana's wife, and the 4 lines suggest what that bet was, whether and then what actually happened, what was the action that took place, and when Duryodhana entered the room when these two were playing a kind of chess in Chaduranga. So those were the lines, and that is something that these people have pondered over, argued, responded. So it tells you how that non-fiction has moved from 1926 till 2011, because there was a tradition of Pandita Parampara in Kannada, which means that these writers had a different way of approaching a particular text. And as you see, in the responses in 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, as you see that these writers got exposed to Western thinking, Western analysis of a text, you can see the difference in responses, because many people were by that time either they were directly exposed or they had gone to England and for their higher education and came back and became English professors, who were the people who were writing Kannada fiction or Kannada non-fiction. So you could see that one book is a great example of how it moved, how the thinking moved, how the responses moved in last 100 years. So I just gave you an example of this. But just to prove a point that there was there is, and there was, and there is still a lot of non-fiction in Kannada. And especially in the recent past, there is, for some reason, in the last 20 years, there is a lot of interest in non-fiction in Kannada. There are interest, when I say it is, the readership of non-fiction has grown considerably. And as a result, you also see a lot of translations into Kannada of non-fiction, which was not happening so much in the past. One can see it as a welcoming sign, but it also sometimes worrying, because it means that a similar thinking and articulation is not happening in Kannada. Okay, so and hence the reader who is exposed to the global events, global thinking, global conflicts, want to read that in Kannada, and those are probably not enough, and hence you go for you seek some translations. Anyway, it is up to from which perspective you see it. But the point again is there is a lot of nonfiction, and it is important. There's some very fine nonfiction of various kinds. There are serious essays, there are serious collections of essays, there are books, there are people who have documented parts of events and histories and certain movements. So it is certainly an interesting area to look at for translators. What I also mean is, it means that it is something that would certainly interest people outside Karnataka, and many of these things are events which may look like a very Karnataka specific, but obviously nothing today is only confined to one place. It is like a butterfly effect, more than a butterfly today.
Again, I find it very interesting how you raise the point of the lack of original scholarship in general in Indian languages. I've been noticing this even with Hindi language publishing, which again, one would have thought of as being more robust. But with translations, I've noticed a lot of translations recently have just been from English to Hindi. And the sharp, obvious decline in original writing, I think that's part of the problem. So, yes, that's very true. I also want to ask you what your sort of advice would be. It's such a broad question, but what would your advice be for translators, especially those who might be just starting off?
I think it is for nonfiction, there is a style which every language has. And that style is very unique to that language. And I would really urge translators to look at this in the sense that, understand this. If I may call that swabhava, of a language. So, and of course, it differs from writer to writer, but then for a language, it is. I feel it is important to understand this style. Yeah, because style is something that people develop, with a lot of effort and pain, so that it is tuned to that particular culture, particular vocabulary, particular audience that you are addressing. So I feel that understanding it is very important for nonfiction translators. If I can compare this is something similar to a tone in fiction. Because the tone is very important in fiction. Because once you get the tone, then you know what you can use, what kind of words and phrases you can use, and what you can't use. And I think it is very similar for nonfiction as well. You need to understand what is the swabhava of this text and what is the narrative style of this text. And it is important to bring in that into English, because then the translation becomes more effective. Instead of bringing everything into a standard English, this would be more effective.
Swabhava is a great word. So, and in fact, I'm struck.
Swabhava is a character. Swabhava is a personality. Swabhava is all these things mixed. Swabhava, yeah.
Swa would be of the self, and bhava would be emotion, right? Broadly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Emotion of
in a very emotion, not in a very broad sense. Yeah.
Yes, bhava is, I suppose all words are fundamentally untranslatable,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Bhava is also emotion. Sometimes you see also as a context. Sometimes, so it's a very one can see it in a very wider context and sense. Yeah.
I'm reminded, in fact, because I'm reading Ghachar Ghochar in English and I'm reading it again. And there's this line where you say that words by themselves don't have any meaning. They burst into meaning when they enter someone's mind.
Yeah.
I think is such a wonderful way of phrasing that, because it's true. What is a word until it's something in your mind? So anyway, okay, my final question to you is then, could we have a comment from you on the NIF Translation Fellowships, please, and what your hope is with this initiative?
I think this is a great initiative because, see, always such fellowships inspire people to do certain work. And it also creates space for translators to take up difficult things. What happens is that many times there are many translators, there are many good translators in every language. And it is possible that, and I know that some of them think like this and do a lot of work, but then they don't get that space either to take off from their work or to have certain framework or certain, something that triggers this. And I feel NIF is the one that provides this. And I already know that in the last 4-5 days, I have received so many calls, and then I know that there is an excitement. There's an excitement about this. There is a lot of interest. And I really hope that people take this up seriously, and we get plenty of applications. There is enormous scope to translate work. There are so many texts worthy of translation and of this project, and there are so many good translators. So I feel it's going to be very exciting and going to be very competitive, if I can say, because it's really good, because then we know that there is so much of potential. There is so much, whether it is through NIF or otherwise, there is that entire process has triggered certain kind of preparation in the mind of the translators, and it will not go waste. Even if somebody applies for this, and even if the translator, because I know that there are limited number of fellowships, but even if a person does not get, but then that effort will not go waste, because that effort and that that thinking would have gone behind in applying, and it will not go waste. It will certainly become very useful to the translator in bringing that translation out sometime in future also.